You know that feeling when you realize you've walked into something you were never supposed to see? That cold dread that creeps up your spine and whispers, "You should have stayed away." That's exactly how Aloan Briar felt the first time she saw two versions of the Duke standing in the same hallway. And by then, it was already too late to leave. Hello, everyone. Before we dive into tonight's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic tales of passion, power, and forbidden love. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city or country in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Thank you so much. Now, let us return to our story. Let me tell you something about Aloan Briar. She wasn't special. She wasn't brave. She wasn't the kind of girl who went looking for adventure or danger or mystery. She was the kind of girl who kept her head down, worked herself to the bone, and hoped, foolishly, that the world would reward her for it. It didn't. Her sister framed her for theft. Her fiancé believed the lie without question. Her family cast her out into the snow with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of bitter lessons. So when she saw the job listing Maid wanted, Thornhelm Castle, immediate start, Christmas Eve, no references required, she didn't ask questions. She just went. Thornhelm Castle looked like something out of a ghost story. All stone towers and snow-covered courtyards, with windows like narrow, watchful eyes. Aloan stood at the servants' entrance, clutching the parchment in her frozen hands, and wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. The door opened before she could knock. A tall, grim-faced woman in black stared down at her. "You're late." "I'm on time, actually. I'm Mrs. Grimm, housekeeper. Inside. Now." Aloan stepped into the castle and immediately felt the wrongness of it. The air was too still, the silence too heavy. And everywhere, there were mirrors. Big, gilded, ornate mirrors lining the walls, reflecting her tired face and hollow eyes back at her a dozen times over. "The other staff have been here for years," Mrs. Grimm said as they walked, her heels clicking against the stone floor. "Decades, some of them. They know the Duke's ways. They know the rules." "And the rules are?" Mrs. Grimm stopped so abruptly that Aloan nearly ran into her. The older woman turned, her expression unreadable. "Don't trust what you see after dark. Don't question the Duke. And never, ever, speak of what you think you've seen unless you're certain it was real." Aloan's mouth went dry. "I don't understand." "You will." They descended a narrow staircase into the servants' quarters, a dim, cramped maze of small rooms and shared corridors. A few maids glanced up as Aloan passed, their faces pale and drawn. One, an older woman with trembling hands, whispered something to her companion and quickly looked away. No one smiled. No one welcomed her. "You'll sleep here," Mrs. Grimm said, pushing open a door to reveal a tiny room with a single bed, a cracked mirror, and a window that looked out onto the snow-covered courtyard. "The staff assembly is in 1 hour. The Duke will address everyone personally tonight. It's Christmas Eve." "Is that special?" Mrs. Grimm's mouth thinned into a grim line. "The Duke tests his staff every Christmas Eve. It's tradition. Those who fail," she paused, "are no longer employed." "What kind of test?" "You'll see." And with that, Mrs. Grimm left, the door closing with a hollow thud. Aloan stood alone in the cold little room, her breath misting in the air. She moved to the window and looked out at the castle grounds. Everything was still, silent, beautiful in a haunted, lonely way. She had nowhere else to go, no family to return to, no friends to shelter her, no future waiting beyond these walls. "I'll play along," she thought. "I'll pass whatever test he gives. I'll survive." She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, exhausted down to her bones. Her eyes drifted to the cracked mirror above the wash basin. And for just a moment, just a flicker, her reflection smiled. Even though Aloan's lips hadn't moved. She blinked, heart stuttering. The reflection was normal again. Still.
Tired. Hers.
You're imagining things, she told herself firmly. You're exhausted. That's all. But deep in her chest, something whispered a warning she couldn't name. An hour later, Eloan stood in the great hall with the rest of the staff. 30 servants, all silent, all standing at attention in neat rows. The room was cavernous, lined with more mirrors, more portraits, more shadows than light. Candles flickered in wall sconces, casting everything in unsteady gold. And then he entered. Duke Callistus Vale.
Tall. Pale.
Sharply handsome in a cold, distant way, like a statue given breath. His dark hair was swept back from a high forehead, his jaw tight, his eyes, gray as winter storms, scanning the room with the precision of a predator. He limped.
Heavily.
His right hand gripped a silver cane, his steps uneven, deliberate. His left leg dragged slightly, the sound of it echoing in the silence. "Good evening," he said, his voice low, clipped, edged with something Eloan couldn't name. Not cruelty. Not kindness. Control. As is tradition, I will be observing each of you over the coming days. You will be tested. Your loyalty. Your competence. Your attention to detail. His gaze swept the room and stopped on Eloan. For a moment, their eyes met. His expression didn't change, but something in his gaze, something sharp and searching, made her feel like he was looking through her, into her, reading every thought she'd ever had. Then he looked away. Those who fail will be dismissed. Immediately. Without explanation. I suggest you all remain vigilant. He turned to leave, his cane tapping against the floor, his limp pronounced. But as he passed the great mirror on the far wall, Eloan saw his reflection. And it didn't limp. Her breath caught. She blinked, looking again. The Duke was limping toward the door, his cane striking the floor with each uneven step. But his reflection in the mirror. I walked perfectly.
Smoothly.
Without hesitation. Eloan's heart slammed against her ribs.
No.
That's not possible. She looked around, but no one else seemed to notice. The other servants were already filing out, heads bowed, silent. Mrs. Grimm touched her shoulder. Come along, girl. Eloan followed, her mind racing, her skin cold. You imagined it. You're tired. But she knew what she'd seen.
2.
And as she left the great hall, she glanced back one last time. The mirror was empty now, but carved into the silver frame, almost hidden in the ornate design, were words she hadn't noticed before. What you see is not always what is. And froze. At the end of the hall, silhouetted against the faint glow of a distant candle, stood the Duke. But he wasn't limping. He stood perfectly straight, perfectly still, watching her. Eloan blinked. And suddenly there were 2 of him. One limping toward her from the left, cane tapping against the stone floor. One standing motionless on the right, staring directly at her. Her heart stopped. Her breath caught. And she screamed. The scream tore through the silent hallway like a crack of thunder. Within seconds, doors burst open. Footsteps pounded against stone. Voices shouted in confusion and alarm. Eloan stood frozen in the corridor, her back pressed against the cold wall, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. 2 of them. There were 2 of him. But when the servants rounded the corner, candles held high, there was only one Duke. He stood 10 feet away, leaning heavily on his silver cane, his face stern and unreadable. His left leg was bent at an awkward angle, favoring his weight to the right. Limping. Just like always. The other Duke, the one who'd been standing perfectly still, perfectly straight, was gone. What is the meaning of this? Mrs. Grimm's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. She strode forward, her face twisted in fury, her eyes blazing as they locked onto Eloan. What have you done? I saw. Eloan's voice broke. She looked desperately at the other servants, at the Duke, back down the hall where the second figure had been standing. There were 2. 2 what? Mrs. Grimm snapped. 2 of him. 2 Dukes. One was standing there and the other was. Enough. The Duke's voice was quiet, cold, but it silenced everyone instantly. He stepped forward, his cane tapping rhythmically against the floor. His gray eyes fixed on Eloan with an intensity that made her feel like she was being dissected. "You saw two of me," he said slowly. It wasn't a question. Eloan's throat tightened. She nodded. The Duke's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, something she couldn't name. "Hysteria," Mrs. Grimm said sharply. "The girl is clearly unwell. She hasn't slept properly since she arrived. I'll have her removed first thing in the morning." "No," the Duke said. Mrs. Grimm blinked. "Your Grace? She stays." He didn't look at the housekeeper. His gaze remained locked on Eloan. "For now." "But Your Grace, she's clearly—" "I said she stays." His tone left no room for argument. Mrs. Grimm's jaw tightened, but she dipped her head. "As you wish, Your Grace." The Duke turned his attention back to Eloan. "Go to your room," he said quietly. "We'll speak in the morning." Eloan nodded mutely and hurried past him, her legs shaking so badly she could barely walk. Behind her, she heard Mrs. Grimm dismissing the other servants, ordering them back to bed, muttering under her breath about foolish girls and wasted chances. But Eloan didn't care, because as she'd passed the Duke, she'd seen something that made her blood run cold. He had no shadow. Eloan sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the door, waiting for morning, waiting to be dismissed, waiting for whatever came next. But morning didn't come first.
He did.
The knock was soft, almost hesitant. Eloan's breath caught. "Miss Briar." The Duke's voice came through the door. "May I come in?" She stood slowly, her heart pounding. This is it. He's going to fire me himself. Or worse. She opened the door and froze. The Duke stood in the dim hallway, bathed in the faint glow of a single candle he carried. But he wasn't leaning on his cane. He wasn't limping. He stood perfectly straight, perfectly still, his gray eyes fixed on hers with an expression she'd never seen before. Desperation. "What exactly did you see?" he asked quietly. Eloan's mouth went dry. She could lie. She should lie. Tell him she was tired, confused, seeing things that weren't there. But something in his eyes stopped her. Something raw. Humans. Afraid. "I saw two of you," she whispered. For a long moment he didn't move, didn't speak. Then his shoulders sagged, and he let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped inside him for years. "Thank God," he murmured. Eloan stared at him. "What?" He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. Not threatening, just exhausted. "You're the first person in 3 years to say that out loud," he said, his voice low and rough. "Everyone else, servants, physicians, even my own advisors, they all think I'm mad. Paranoid. Broken. I don't understand. I'm not mad." He turned to face her, and the desperation in his eyes was almost too much to bear. "There is someone else. A perfect double. It appears randomly. It wears my face. It speaks with my voice. It gives orders in my name." Eloan's pulse roared in her ears. That's not possible." "I know." He ran a hand through his dark hair, and for the first time, he looked less like a cold, distant Duke and more like a man who was drowning. "I've been trying to catch it for years, trying to prove I'm not insane. But it's careful. It only appears when I'm alone, or when no one will believe what they've seen." "Then why do you limp?" The question tumbled out before she could stop it. He looked at her sharply. Then, slowly, a bitter smile crossed his face. "Because it doesn't." Eloan's stomach dropped. "I limp to mark myself," he continued. "So I can tell the difference. So others can tell the difference. But no one ever does. They just think I'm crippled and paranoid and cruel." "But I saw it," Eloan whispered. "I saw both of you. At the same time." "I know." He stepped closer, and she saw the fear flickering in his eyes again. "And that's why you're in danger now." "What do you mean?" "It's never been seen by someone like you before. Someone who can distinguish us. Someone who can prove I'm not mad." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "And now that you've seen it." He paused. It will want you dead. Eloan's blood turned to ice. Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. The Duke went rigid. They both turned toward the sound. Slowly, the door opened. And standing in the doorway, bathed in candlelight, was the Duke again. Same face, same voice, same gray eyes. But this one was smiling and leaning on a silver cane. "There you are, brother," the second Duke said softly. Eloan couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't scream. The Duke beside her, the one without the cane, stepped protectively in front of her. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. The smiling Duke tilted his head, his expression almost curious. "You told her," he said. "How interesting." "What do you want?" the real Duke demanded. The copy's smile widened. "The same thing I've always wanted, Callistus." He stepped into the room. To stop being a shadow. Eloan couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. There were two of them. Two Duke Callistus Valas standing in her tiny room, identical in every way except one was limping, leaning on a cane, and the other stood perfectly straight, smiling like he'd just won a game she hadn't known they were playing. The real Duke, at least the one she thought was real, stepped protectively in front of her, his body a wall between her and the smiling copy. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. The copy tilted his head, studying them both with an unsettling calm. "You told her," he said, his voice smooth and polite. Almost charming. "I wondered if you ever would." "What do you want?" Callistus demanded, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. The copy's smile widened. "The same thing you want, Callistus. To stop being half a man." Eloan's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to run,
Scream. Do something.
but her legs wouldn't obey. The copy's gaze shifted to her, and his gray eyes, so identical to Callistus's, locked onto hers. "She can see me," he said softly, almost reverently. "Truly see me. Do you know how rare that is?" "Don't look at her," Callistus snapped. But the copy ignored him. He took a step forward, his movements smooth and graceful, unburdened by the limp that plagued the real Duke. "You're not family," the copy continued, speaking directly to Eloan now. "You're not a mage. You don't carry the old blood of Thornhelm. So, why can you see me when no one else can?" Eloan's mouth was dry. She forced herself to speak. I don't know." The copy smiled again, and this time there was something almost human in it. Something curious.
Hungry.
"Neither do I. But I intend to find out." "Enough." Callistus's voice cracked like a whip. "Tell me what you want or get out." The copy finally turned his attention back to the Duke, and his smile faded into something colder, sharper. "You already know what I want, brother." "Don't call me that." "Why not? It's what we are, isn't it? Two halves of the same whole. You, the broken body. Me, the perfect reflection." Callistus's jaw tightened. "You're not my brother. You're a mistake." For the first time, something flickered in the copy's eyes. Not anger, not hurt, longing. "A mistake," he repeated softly.
Yes.
"I suppose that's what I am." He turned away, moving toward the window, and for a moment, the candlelight caught his profile. He looked tired, almost fragile. "Generations ago," the copy said quietly, "your ancestors performed a ritual. A desperate, dangerous ritual to protect the Thornhelm bloodline." Eloan's breath caught. She glanced at Callistus, whose face had gone pale. "They created a guardian," the copy continued. "A mirror image. A perfect double who could take the Duke's place in times of danger. Assassinations. Poisonings.
Wars.
The Guardian would step forward, and the real Duke would survive." "But something went wrong," Callistus said flatly. The copy turned back to face them, and his smile was bitter now. "Something always goes wrong with blood magic, doesn't it?" He stepped closer, and Eloan felt Callistus tense beside her. "The ritual worked," the copy said. "Too well. The Guardian wasn't just a mindless reflection. It had thoughts, memories,
Will.
It didn't want to serve. It wanted to be." "And now you want to replace me," Callistus said coldly. The copy's eyes hardened. Can you blame me? You get to live. You get to breathe. You get to feel the sun on your face and the cold of winter and the taste of wine and the warmth of another person's touch. His voice dropped to a whisper. I get nothing. I exist only in stolen moments, in reflections and shadows. I am a ghost wearing your face. For a moment, the room was silent. Eloan's heart ached in a way she didn't expect, because despite everything, despite the terror clawing at her throat, she heard the pain in the copy's voice. He wasn't just a monster. He was a prisoner. But then the copy's gaze shifted back to her, and the moment shattered. But you, he said softly, stepping closer. You see me, not as a shadow, not as a mistake. You see me as real. Callistus moved instantly, pulling Eloan back, putting himself between them again. Don't touch her. The copy stopped, his smile returning. I already have. Eloan's blood turned to ice. What? The copy's eyes gleamed. How do you think you ended up here, Eloan Briar? A job posting that appeared out of nowhere? A castle that doesn't advertise for staff? A duke who hired you sight unseen? Her stomach dropped. You brought me here, she whispered. I called you here, the copy corrected. Your name appeared in the glass 3 days before you arrived. I didn't know why. I still don't. But the magic wanted you. And now. He tilted his head, studying her like a puzzle he couldn't solve. Now I understand why Callistus is so afraid. Get out, Callistus said, his voice shaking with barely restrained rage. The copy's smile widened. As you wish. And then between one blink and the next, he was gone. The room was empty. Just Eloan and Callistus, standing in the flickering candlelight, the air still heavy with the ghost of the copy's presence. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Callistus turned to her, and she saw it clearly now, the terror he'd been hiding beneath the coldness. He was shaking. You need to leave this castle, he said hoarsely. Tonight.
Now.
Before it's too late. I have nowhere to go, Eloan whispered. Then I'll give you money. Horses. Whatever you need. But you cannot stay here. Why? She demanded, her fear finally giving way to frustration. Why does it want me? What does this have to do with me? I don't know. Callistus ran a hand through his hair, and for the first time, he looked less like a duke and more like a man on the edge of breaking. But it's never acted like this before. It's never brought someone here. It's never wanted anything except my life. He stepped closer, his gray eyes boring into hers. And now it wants you. Which means you're in more danger than you can possibly understand. Eloan's chest tightened. Then help me, she said quietly. Tell me what to do. Callistus stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he exhaled. Stay close to me, he said. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't trust anyone, not the servants, not Mrs. Grimm, not even me if something feels wrong. How will I know? You're the only one who can tell us apart, he said. So, you'll have to trust your instincts. Eloan swallowed hard. Then, softly, she asked the question that had been clawing at the back of her mind since the moment the copy vanished. How do I know you're the real one? Callistus met her eyes. And for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something other than coldness there. She saw honesty. You don't, he said quietly. Eloan didn't sleep that night. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the copy's face, so identical to Callistus's, yet so terrifyingly different. She heard his words echoing in her mind. I called you here.
But why?
What did a creature born of blood magic want with a girl who had nothing? No family, no power, no future. By the time dawn broke, she'd made her decision. She was going to help the Duke. Not because she was brave, she wasn't. Not because she understood what was happening, she didn't. But because for the first time in years, someone had looked at her and seen something other than a burden. Something other than a failure. Callistus had seen someone who mattered. And that was worth fighting for. She found him in his study, just after sunrise. He was standing by the window, staring out at the snow-covered grounds, his posture rigid, his cane resting against the desk. He didn't turn when she entered. "You should have left," he said quietly. "I'm staying," Aloan replied. That made him turn. His gray eyes swept over her, searching for doubt, for fear. But whatever he saw on her face made him pause. "Why?" Aloan lifted her chin. "Because you're the only person in this castle who's told me the truth. And because if that thing brought me here for a reason, I'd rather face it than run." For a long moment, Callistus said nothing. Then, slowly, something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "You're braver than you think," he said. "Or more foolish. Perhaps both." He moved to the desk and pulled out a sheet of parchment, spreading it flat. It was a list of names, servants, staff members, people Aloan had seen in passing. "If you're going to help me," Callistus said, "you need to understand what we're up against." He tapped the list. "The copy doesn't just appear randomly. It's been living among us, moving through the castle, giving orders, interacting with the staff." Aloan's stomach turned. "For how long?"
Years.
"Maybe longer."
His jaw tightened.
"And the worst part is, most of them don't even realize they've been serving it." "How is that possible?" "Because it's perfect," Callistus said bitterly. "It wears my face, speaks with my voice, knows things only I should know. The staff see what they expect to see, a duke giving orders. They don't question it. But you said some of them notice." "Some do. And those are the ones I've been trying to protect." He looked at her, and the exhaustion in his eyes was almost unbearable. "That's why I fire them. Send them away. Before it realizes they've seen too much." Aloan's throat tightened. "You're not cruel," she said softly. "You're trying to save them." Callistus looked away. "I'm trying, but I'm failing." The plan was simple. Aloan would move through the castle as she normally did, cleaning, serving, observing. But now, she'd be watching for patterns, listening for inconsistencies. Who served the Duke when he was supposedly in his study, but she knew he was somewhere else? Who mentioned orders Callistus swore he never gave? Who seemed nervous?
Confused?
Afraid? It didn't take long to find the cracks. A footman mentioned delivering tea to the Duke in the library, but Callistus had been with Aloan in the study at that exact time. A cook insisted the Duke had requested pheasant for dinner, even though Callistus hated game birds. And then there was the maid. Her name was Iris, a quiet, mousy girl who kept her head down and rarely spoke. Aloan found her in the laundry room, folding linens with trembling hands. "Iris," Aloan said gently, "can I ask you something?" The girl looked up, eyes wide and wary. "Of course, miss." Aloan kept her tone light, casual. "Does the Duke have a shadow?" Iris froze. Her hands stilled on the fabric, her face going pale.
I
don't. It's all right," Aloan said quickly. "I'm just curious." But Iris's eyes had gone distant, unfocused, like she was trying to remember something that refused to stay solid in her mind. "I served him yesterday," she whispered. "In the west corridor. He asked me to bring him water. But when I turned around..." She trailed off. "When you turned around, what?" Aloan pressed gently. Iris's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I don't remember seeing his shadow." That night, Iris was found dead. Aloan heard the screams from her room and ran into the corridor with the other servants. They gathered in a horrified cluster near the base of the East Tower, staring up at the broken body sprawled on the snow-covered stones. Iris, her neck bent at an unnatural angle, her eyes open and empty. Mrs. Grimm arrived moments later, her face pale but composed. "An accident," she announced. "The girl must have slipped on the stairs." But Aloan saw the way the other servants exchanged glances, the way they looked at the tower and quickly looked away. They didn't believe it, and neither did she. Aloan found Callistus in his study an hour later. "It killed her," she said without preamble. Callistus didn't look up from the papers on his desk. "I know. She told me she didn't remember seeing your shadow. And now she's dead." "I know," he said again, and this time his voice cracked. Eloan stepped closer. You've been trying to save them, firing them, sending them away before it could reach them. Callistus finally looked up, and the guilt in his eyes was devastating. And it's not enough. It's never enough. You're not the monster they think you are, Eloan said softly. Callistus let out a bitter laugh. Aren't I? I've let people die. I've terrorized my own staff. I've hidden the truth because I was too afraid to be called mad. You're surviving, Eloan said. That's not the same as being a monster. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he stood and crossed the room toward her. You don't know what I've done, he said quietly. What I've had to become to keep this castle from falling apart. Then tell me. Callistus stopped just in front of her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. I've had to become cruel, he said. Cold. Paranoid. I've had to push everyone away so they wouldn't get close enough to see the truth. So they wouldn't become targets. His voice dropped to a whisper. I've had to become a monster to survive. Eloan reached out, slowly, carefully, and placed her hand over his. It was the first time she'd touched him. His skin was warm.
Real.
Humans. You're not a monster, she said. You're just a man trying to fight something no one else can see. For a moment, Callistus didn't move. Then, slowly, his fingers curled around hers. And for the first time since she'd arrived at Thornhelm Castle, Eloan felt something other than fear. She felt seen. That night, Eloan returned to her room, her mind spinning, her heart still racing from the warmth of Callistus's hand in hers. She moved to the wash basin to splash cold water on her face. And froze. In the mirror above the basin, her reflection stared back at her. But it was smiling. Even though Eloan's face was perfectly still. Her breath caught. The reflection's smile widened. And then, slowly, it lifted one hand.
And waved.
Eloan didn't tell Callistus about the reflection. Not immediately. Part of her didn't want to believe it had happened. The smiling face in the mirror. The hand that waved even though hers hadn't moved. But the other part, the part that was learning to trust her instincts in this cursed place, knew exactly what it meant. The copy wasn't just watching her anymore. It was claiming her. The next morning, Callistus came to her room before dawn. Come with me, he said without preamble. There's something you need to see. Eloan didn't ask questions. She simply followed him through the silent, shadowed corridors of Thornhelm Castle, descending deeper than she'd ever been before. Down a narrow spiral staircase. Through a locked iron door that groaned as Callistus pushed it open. Into a hidden library buried beneath the castle's foundation. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old parchment. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with leather-bound books that looked like they hadn't been touched in centuries. And everywhere, there were mirrors. Small ones. Large ones. Cracked and whole. Some are covered with cloth. Others reflect nothing but darkness. What is this place? Eloan whispered. The archive, Callistus said quietly. Where my family kept records of the ritual. And everything that came after. He moved to the center of the room, where a large mirror stood draped in black fabric. This is the original, he said. The one used to create the Guardian. Eloan's breath caught. Callistus hesitated, his hand hovering over the cloth. 3 days before you arrived, he said slowly, your name appeared here. He pulled the cloth away. The mirror was ancient, cracked down the center. The silver backing tarnished and peeling. But scratched into the glass, deep, jagged, as if carved from behind, was a name. Eloan Briar. Eloan's knees went weak. That's not possible. I thought the same thing, Callistus said grimly. I checked every record, every staff roster. I'd never heard your name before. Never posted a job listing. Eloan stared at the mirror, her pulse roaring in her ears. I saw the listing, she whispered. In the village. On a board outside the tavern. I never posted one. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Then how? Callistus turned to face her, and the fear in his eyes mirrored her own. The copy wanted you here. They searched the archives together. Dusty books, crumbling scrolls, records dating back centuries. And then Elowen found it. A ledger from over 200 years ago, listing the names of the mages who'd performed the ritual to create the Mirror Guardian. Her hands shook as she read down the list. Anne stopped. Alara Briar. No, she breathed. Callistus leaned over her shoulder, reading the name. Briar, he said softly. Your family name. It's common, Elowen said desperately. It doesn't mean. But Callistus was already pulling another book from the shelf. He flipped through the pages, his movements quick and sharp. Then he stopped and showed her a genealogy, a family tree, Alara Briar at the top, and generations below, traced through daughters and daughters and daughters. Elowen Briar. Elowen's vision blurred. I'm descended from her, she whispered. From the woman who created the copy. Callistus's jaw tightened. The ritual responds to bloodlines. That's why you can see it when no one else can. That's why your name appeared in the mirror. He looked at her, and the grim certainty in his eyes made her stomach drop. That's why it wants you. The temperature in the room plummeted. Elowen felt it before she saw him. The cold that seeped into her bones, the prickle of awareness that crawled up her spine. She turned, and there he was, the copy, standing just behind them, silent as a shadow, his gray eyes fixed on Elowen. Callistus moved instantly, stepping between them, his hand going to the blade at his belt. Stay back, he warned. But the copy didn't move. He just stared at Elowen with an expression she couldn't name. Not hunger, not anger, something softer, something almost reverent. You feel it too, don't you? The copy said quietly. Elowen's throat tightened. Feel what? The copy took a step closer, and Callistus raised the blade. I said stay back. But the copy ignored him. His entire focus was on Elowen. That you were meant to be here, he said, his voice low and almost gentle. That this isn't a coincidence. That every choice you made, every step you took, led you to this moment. Elowen's breath came in shallow gasps. I don't understand. The copy's expression shifted. Something raw flickered in his eyes. I was made for you, he whispered. Callistus lunged forward, blade raised, but the copy moved faster. In one fluid motion, he dropped to his knees. Not in front of Callistus. In front of Elowen. The room went deathly silent. Elowen stared down at him, her heart hammering, her mind screaming at her to run. But she couldn't move. I have been waiting for you, the copy said, his voice breaking. For 200 years I have waited. For what? Elowen whispered. The copy looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than perfection in his face. She saw pain. To be free. Before Callistus could react, before Elowen could even breathe, the copy vanished.
Gone.
As if he'd never been there at all. The warmth returned to the room. The oppressive cold lifted. But Elowen's hands were still shaking. Callistus lowered his blade slowly, his face pale. It's never knelt before, he said hoarsely. Not to me. Not to my father. Not to anyone. Elowen's legs gave out. She sank onto the nearest chair, her mind spinning. What does it want from me? She whispered. Callistus sheathed his blade and crouched in front of her, his gray eyes searching hers. I don't know, he said. But whatever it is. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was grim. It's not going to stop until it gets it. Elowen looked past him at the ancient mirror, at her name carved into the glass. Elowen Briar, scratched from the other side. Waiting. Always waiting. And she realized, with cold, sinking certainty, she hadn't come to Thornhelm Castle by accident. She'd been summoned.
By blood.
By magic. By something that had been waiting for her since before she was born. Christmas Eve came to Thornhelm Castle like a cold breath held too long. The great hall had been transformed. Candles blazed in every sconce, their light reflecting off polished mirrors and gilded frames. Garlands of holly and ivy draped the stone walls, and a massive fire roared in the hearth. It should have been beautiful, but it felt like a trap. Elowen stood near the Duke's chair, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every servant in the castle had been assembled, 30 souls standing in neat rows, their faces pale, their eyes wide with dread. They knew what tonight meant.
The test.
Callistus stood at the center of the hall, leaning on a silver cane, his face cold and unreadable. He looked every inch the paranoid, crippled duke they all feared. But Eloan knew better. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his knuckles were white around the handle of his cane, the fear he was hiding beneath the mask. Tonight, they were going to force the copy into the open. And Eloan was the bait. Callistus's voice cut through the silence like a blade. As is tradition, I will conduct the final test. The servants shifted nervously. You will each be called forward and answer one question. Anyone who lies will be dismissed immediately. Eloan's pulse roared in her ears. One by one, the servants approached. Callistus asked each the same question. Who gave you your orders this morning? Most answered quickly. You, your grace. But some hesitated. A young maid stammered. I believe it was you, your grace. But you what? I can't be certain, your grace. Callistus dismissed her with a wave. You may go. The maid fled, relief flooding her face. Then came the butler, an older man, gray-haired and dignified, who had served the Vale family for decades. He approached with measured steps and bowed. Your grace. Who gave you your orders this morning? The butler hesitated, and then slowly he spoke. I served you twice today, my lord. The room went still. Callistus's eyes narrowed. Twice. Yes, your grace. Once in your study, where you requested tea, and once in the chapel, where you asked me to prepare the altar for tonight's service. The murmurs started, whispers rippling through the crowd. Callistus leaned forward. And did you think that was strange? The butler's face was pale, but his voice was steady. Yes, your grace. Because you couldn't have been in both places at the same time. The whispers grew louder. Eloan's hands trembled. And then, the temperature in the hall plummeted. The candles flickered. And from the back of the crowd, a figure stepped forward. Identical to Callistus in every way.
Gasps.
Screams. Servants stumbled backward, knocking into each other, their faces twisted in terror. Because now, there were 2 dukes standing in the great hall. One leaning on his cane near the center. One standing tall and perfect at the edge of the crowd. The copy. Callistus didn't move. His voice was cold, controlled. Now you see it. The copy tilted his head, his expression calm, almost serene. Did you really think this would work, Callistus? I thought it was time everyone saw the truth. The copy smiled faintly. And what truth is that? That you've been so desperate to prove you're not mad, you'd expose me in front of your entire household. You've been hiding long enough. I've been surviving, the copy corrected. Just like you. The servants were paralyzed. Some had fled the hall entirely. Others stood frozen, staring at the 2 identical men with wide, disbelieving eyes. Eloan's breath came in shallow gasps. The copy's gaze shifted and landed on her. Hello, Eloan. Callistus moved instantly, stepping between them. Don't. But the copy ignored him. He walked forward, slowly, deliberately, his movements smooth and fluid, unburdened by the limp that plagued the real duke. You brought her here as bait, the copy said softly. How cruel of you, brother. She's not yours, Callistus said through gritted teeth. Isn't she? The copy stopped just a few feet away. And then, to everyone's shock, he knelt. Not to Callistus. To Eloan. The hall went deathly silent. Eloan's heart stopped. The copy looked up at her, his face, so achingly identical to Callistus's, filled with something she couldn't name. Longing. Desperation. Hope. And then he spoke. His voice was layered, distorted, as if 100 voices were speaking at once. But beneath the strangeness, there was reverence. Mother. The room erupted. Servants screamed. Some ran. Others collapsed to their knees, crossing themselves, praying to gods they'd half forgotten. Eloan stumbled backward, her mind reeling. I'm not. But the copy reached for her hand. You carry her blood, he said, his voice breaking. The one who made me. Alara Briar. You are hers. And through you. His eyes glistened. I've been alone for 200 years. Eloan's chest tightened. She looked at Callistus, who had drawn a blade, his face pale, his hand shaking. She looked at the copy, still kneeling, still waiting. And she didn't know what to do. Don't listen to him, Callistus said hoarsely. He's manipulating you. I'm telling her the truth, the copy said quietly. Something you've been too afraid to do. You want to replace me. You want to take everything I have. The copy's expression hardened. I want to exist. There's a difference. He turned back to Eloan, and his voice softened. I didn't bring you here to hurt you. I brought you here because you're the only one who can free me. Free you from what? Eloan whispered. From this. He gestured to himself. From being a reflection. A shadow. A thing that only exists in stolen moments. His hand trembled as he reached toward her. You have the power to break the curse. To make me real. And if she does, Callistus said coldly, what happens to me? The copy's silence was enough. Eloan's breath caught. If I free you, she said slowly, he dies. The copy's eyes closed. Yes. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Callistus raised his blade higher. Then the choice is simple. But the copy shook his head. Is it? He looked at Eloan, and the raw pain in his eyes nearly broke her. He gets to live. He gets to breathe. He gets to feel warmth and cold and joy and sorrow. He gets to be real. His voice dropped to a whisper. What do I get? Eloan's vision blurred. The copy reached for her hand again. Please, he whispered. I have waited so long. Callistus stepped forward, blade gleaming. Eloan. Step away from him. But Eloan couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Because the copy was right. He'd been trapped for 200 years. And she was the only one who could free him. But freeing him meant killing Callistus. The man who'd trusted her. Protected her. Seen her. The man she was starting to care for. The copy's fingers brushed hers. Please. Callistus raised the blade. Eloan.
Now.
And Eloan stood frozen between them, her heart tearing in two. Wait. Eloan's voice cut through the chaos. Callistus froze, blade still raised. The copy remained kneeling, his hand outstretched, his eyes locked on hers. The servants who hadn't fled watched in horrified silence. Eloan stepped forward, not toward Callistus, not toward the copy. Between them. I need the truth, she said, her voice shaking but steady. All of it. From both of you. Callistus's jaw tightened. Eloan.
No.
She turned to face him. You've told me pieces. Fragments. But if you want me to make this choice, I need to understand what I'm choosing. She looked back at the copy, still kneeling.
And you?
If you want me to free you, tell me what that means. What it will cost. The copy's expression shifted. Something raw flickered across his face. Everything, he said softly. Callistus lowered his blade, slightly, but didn't sheath it. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. You want the truth? Here it is. He gestured to the copy with the blade. 200 years ago, my ancestor was dying. Assassins.
Poison.
War on every border. The Vale bloodline was about to end. Eloan listened, her heart pounding. So they performed a ritual, Callistus continued. Blood magic. Dark, ancient, forbidden. They created a guardian, a perfect double who could take the Duke's place in moments of danger. He looked at the copy with barely restrained fury. It worked. The guardian absorbed every assassination attempt, every poisoning, every blade meant for the Duke. And in doing so, the copy said quietly, I also absorbed every year he should have aged, every wound he should have borne, every death he should have died. Eloan's breath caught. The copy rose slowly to his feet, his movements graceful, unhurried. The magic that binds me to the Vale bloodline doesn't just protect them, he said. It sustains them. Every duke since the ritual has lived far longer than they should. Healthier. Stronger. He looked at Callistus. Because I carry the weight of their mortality. Callistus's face was pale. I didn't ask for this. Neither did I. The two stared at each other, mirror images locked in a battle centuries old. Eloan's voice was barely a whisper. What happens if I break the curse? The copy turned to her, and the sadness in his eyes was unbearable. The magic will release me. I will become real.
Solid. Alive.
And me? Callistus asked coldly. The copy's silence was damning. Tell her, Callistus demanded. The copy closed his eyes. He will age, he said quietly. All the years I've carried for him, for his father, his grandfather, every duke back to the beginning, will return to him at once. Eloan's stomach dropped. How many years? 200. The words fell like stones. Eloan looked at Callistus, and the grim acceptance in his face told her he'd already known. If you free him, Callistus said flatly, I will turn to dust before your eyes. Eloan's knees buckled. She caught herself on the edge of a nearby table, her hands shaking. So, I have to choose, she whispered, between killing you or killing him. Yes, the copy said. No, Callistus said at the same time. Eloan looked up sharply. Callistus sheathed his blade and crossed the hall toward her. There's a third option, he said. You do nothing. You leave this castle tonight and never come back. And then what? Eloan demanded. You keep fighting him for the rest of your life? The servants keep disappearing? The curse just continues? Yes. That's not a solution. It's survival, Callistus said harshly, which is more than most people get. He reached for her hand, and his touch was warm, real, human. I don't want you to carry this choice, Eloan. I don't want you to have to live with the weight of it. Eloan stared at him, her chest tight. And what about you? She whispered. Don't you deserve to be free too? Callistus's expression softened, just slightly. I stopped believing in freedom a long time ago. The copy stepped forward, and Callistus moved instantly, putting himself between them. But the copy didn't reach for Eloan. He looked at her over Callistus's shoulder, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet. Broken. I have killed no one, he said. I defended myself when they tried to destroy me. I lived in the moments I was allowed. I tried to be. He looked down at his hands, solid, real, but only for stolen moments. I don't want his life. I don't want his title, or his castle, or his name. His voice cracked. I just want a life. Any life. Even one where no one knows my name. Where I'm no one important. Where I'm just real. Eloan's vision blurred. The copy met her eyes. But I won't beg you to kill him. That's not freedom. That's just trading one prison for another. He stepped back. So I'll give you the same choice he did. Walk away. Leave this place. Forget you ever saw me. And you'll just disappear? Eloan asked. The copy's smile was bitter. I've been disappearing for 200 years. What's another eternity? Eloan looked between them. Callistus, solid, real, standing before her with fear and hope warring in his eyes. The copy, flickering at the edges, already fading, his existence balanced on a knife's edge.
2 men.
2 lives. One impossible choice. There has to be another way, she whispered. There isn't, Callistus said gently. Mages have tried for generations. Then they weren't trying hard enough. Eloan straightened, her hands curling into fists. I'm a briar. My ancestor created this curse. She looked at the copy, then at Callistus. If she could bind you with blood, maybe I can rewrite you with it. Callistus's eyes widened. Eloan, you don't know what you're. I'm not letting either of you die. She turned and strode toward the door, her mind racing. Where are you going? Callistus called after her. Eloan looked back, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Thornhelm Castle, she felt certain. To the library. To find a way to break this curse without killing anyone. Callistus and the copy, exchanged a glance. And then, impossibly, the copy smiled. She really is a briar. Eloan ran. Down the corridors. Down the spiral stairs. Back to the hidden library buried beneath Thornhelm Castle. Behind her, she heard footsteps. 2 sets, perfectly matched. Callistus and the copy, following her into the dark. She burst through the iron door and stumbled into the archive, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The ancient mirror stood in the center of the room, still draped in black cloth, waiting. Always waiting. Eloan ripped the cloth away. The cracked glass gleamed in the candlelight. Her name was still carved into it, jagged and deep. Eloan Briar. Callistus appeared in the doorway, his face pale. Eloan, you can't. Watch me. The copy stepped in beside him, silent, watchful. Eloan pulled a small knife from her pocket, one she'd taken from the kitchens days ago, just in case. She pressed the blade to her palm. What are you doing? Callistus demanded, moving toward her. What I was meant to do. She sliced her palm open. Blood welled up, dark and red, and she pressed her hand against the mirror's surface. The reaction was immediate. The glass flared with light. Blinding.
Burning.
Beautiful. Callistus shielded his eyes. The copy stood frozen, staring at the mirror with something like wonder. And then, slowly, words began to appear in the light, glowing, shimmering, written in a language Eloan didn't know but somehow understood. Blood given in compassion can reshape what blood given in fear has bound. Eloan's heart raced. Elara Briar, she whispered. My ancestor. You created this curse out of fear. Fear of death. Fear of losing your duke. She looked at the copy, then at Callistus. But I'm not afraid. She pressed both palms against the glass, her blood smearing across the ancient surface. I release you, she said, her voice steady and strong. Not into death, but into life. Not as a reflection, but as your own man. The copy gasped. His form flickered, solid, then translucent, then solid again. Eloan. Callistus stepped forward, his voice raw. If you do this, what happens to me? Eloan looked at him, and her eyes were filled with tears. I don't know, she whispered, but I won't kill either of you. She turned back to the mirror, her hands trembling against the glass. Let the mirror break, she said, her voice rising. But let the man remain. Both men.
Separate. Whole.
Free. She closed her eyes. Please. The mirror shattered. The sound was deafening, a crack like thunder, like the world splitting open. Light exploded through the room, blinding and overwhelming, and Eloan was thrown backward, her body slamming against the stone floor. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound. No light. No breath. And then, a gasp. Eloan opened her eyes. The copy was on his knees in the center of the room, his hands pressed against the floor, his chest heaving. But he was solid. No longer flickering. No longer translucent. Real.
Alive.
He looked down at his hands, turning them over slowly, staring at them like he'd never seen them before. I can feel it, he whispered. The cold. The stone. I can feel everything. He looked up at Eloan, and tears streamed down his face. I'm real. A groan came from the other side of the room. Eloan scrambled to her feet and ran to Callistus, who was slumped against the wall, his face pale, his breathing shallow. Callistus. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands shaking as she reached for him. He opened his eyes slowly, and she saw it immediately. He looked different. Older. Not ancient. Not crumbling to dust. But there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Silver streaking through his dark hair. A weariness in his face that spoke of years carried all at once. Did it work? He asked hoarsely. Eloan nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. You're alive. Callistus let out a breath, half laugh, half sob. I'm alive. He reached up, his hand trembling, and cupped her face. You did it. You actually did it. Eloan leaned into his touch, her heart breaking and mending all at once. I told you. I wasn't going to let either of you die. The copy, no, not the copy anymore, stood slowly. He looked at Callistus, then at Aloan. Thank you, he said quietly. Callistus pushed himself to his feet, leaning heavily on Aloan for support. The two men stared at each other. Identical faces. Different lives. What will you do now?
Callistus asked.
The man who had been the copy smiled faintly. I don't know. But for the first time in 200 years, I get to decide. He looked at Aloan. I'll need a name. Aloan smiled through her tears. What about Ash? He considered it, then nodded. Ash Vale. Brother by magic, if not by blood. Callistus extended his hand. Ash stared at it for a long moment. Then he took it. And for the first time, the two men who had been once stood as equals. Ash left Thornhelm Castle that night. He didn't say where he was going, didn't ask for anything. But before he left, he knelt before Aloan one last time. You gave me what no one else could, he said softly. Thank you, Mother. Aloan's throat tightened. Go, she whispered. Be free. Ash rose, smiled, and walked out into the snow, into a world that was finally, truly his. Spring came to Thornhelm. The castle, which had been shrouded in winter for so long, began to thaw. Servants who had fled returned. New staff were hired. The halls filled with life again. And Aloan, no longer a maid, no longer invisible, became the Duke's closest advisor. His confidant. And slowly, carefully, something more. Callistus was different now. The lines around his eyes spoke of the years he'd reclaimed, but the coldness was gone. The paranoia had lifted. He smiled more. Laughed even. One evening, as the sun set over the snow-covered grounds, Aloan and Callistus stood in the great hall, the same hall where she'd first seen two of him. Do you regret it? Callistus asked quietly. Saving us both. Aloan looked at him, this man who was scarred, older, but finally whole. No, she said. I spent my whole life being told I wasn't enough. But I was enough to break a curse no one else could. Callistus took her hand, his touch warm and real. You were enough the moment you walked through that door. Aloan smiled, and for the first time in her life, she believed it. No more reflections, no more tests, just the truth, and the quiet, steady warmth of a love built on trust, courage, and the refusal to let fear win.